Greetings viewers, Eric the Car Guy. Thanks for tuning in. In today's episode, we're going to be working on my 1999 Honda Civic behind me. However, this is a problem that plagues, Hondas and Acuras going way back, and that's rear control arm bushings. These things can crack and break and pretty much become useless, but they're integral to the rear suspension on these vehicles. Now, years ago, I shot a video on this before I even started YouTube that's actually available now that I'll link down in the description. But today we're going to try something a little different. We're going to try to make the job a little bit easier with a special tool that I have for doing this very job. Hopefully it eliminates a lot of the steps required to replace these bushings. If it does, well, I just showed you something very useful. So let's head to the back of the car and see what we're looking at. Here we are at the rear of the vehicle, and this is the bushing that I'm talking about specifically that we're going to be replacing today, and this is where it's damaged, as you can see. This is a very common problem on Hondas and Acuras. If you have one with this style of rear suspension, take a look at these bushings, and if they're cracked or broken like this video is going to help you. One of the things I like about the prospect of using this tool, and by the way, this is the first time I'm going to be using it, is the fact that you don't have to deal with the rear control arm back here, especially this bolt that holds the rear strut in place. It's been my experience that these bolts have a tendency to get frozen up inside these rear bushings and can be very difficult, if not impossible, to remove without, well, damaging the strut or this bushing back here. But what we will have to do is we will have to pretty much bring this whole thing down to a place to where we can work on it. And what that's going to involve is, disconnecting the parking brake and this brake line up here and all this stuff up front. Where you're going to run into probably the most trouble is here with this bolt. This bolt is here to help with the alignment of this rear control arm. There is a nut on the other side inside this area that if it's frozen up, well, it could be a real problem for us. So what I've done is I've gone through this hole and sprayed some penetrating oil in the back of this nut in hopes that it will loosen things up so that this comes loose. We're going to be moving things around quite a bit. And we don't want to damage the brake line or anything, so I think step one might be to loosen this up. This will help free up this brake line. Another thing to do, as long as we're here, we need to remove these two fasteners for this upper control arm. These are 14 millimeter. I'm also going to loosen up this parking brake cable, which is attached here at the body, and one more place on the lower control arm, which we'll get to next. This guy's a 12 millimeter. There's another connection here on the control arm. Let's see if we can get this 14 that's been soaking with penetrating oil. I think it's worth mentioning that after doing this job, you're going to need to get an alignment. This is a 14 millimeter. I'm working it back and forth for a reason. It's my experience that this may help avoid breakage. I'm getting less and less confident with every turn. I'm considering drilling a hole here just so I could send some heat through the inside of this enclosure here, but that still doesn't solve the problem if the bolt is seized inside this bushing. If you do this job, I'd be prepared with this piece right here and new bolts. Things may go south, and if they do, like they are here, you're going to need these parts because the bushings inside of this are, well, they're going to get damaged. I'm going to start with a pilot hole right about here. That's the nut that you're dealing with on the back side there, and that nut slides back and forth inside there, but now I can get a torch in, heat it up, and hopefully get it to start moving. First, I'm just going to get a look inside here just to see what it's doing. Yeah, the whole thing is turning. Keep in mind that as you torch this, you're very likely to melt the bushing, so you're going to need, if you commit to this, you're going to need this part. There's just too much penetrating oil in there. It's catching on fire. It's in an enclosed space. I don't like it. So I got to find some way to neutralize that before I go further. I have my water squirt bottle at the ready. I can be scared, or I can just do it. think it's actually the bolt and the bushing over anything else. Yeah, that bushing is roasted, but it is spinning inside now at least. I think we're out. Things went sideways out here because of the whole bushing thing. It always starts out good, right? So the bolt came loose from the nut on the inside, great. But the sleeve for the bushing is still rusted to the bolt. So this sleeve is just spinning and this whole thing is bent outward, which is not good, but we can bend it back. Now I'm gonna heat that bushing sleeve and find some way to hold it and hopefully break the bolt loose from the inside of that. Well, that part was a success, just for good measure. With that finally disconnected, the next is going to be these two 17mm fasteners that hold the control arm in there. Need a bigger boat. With everything disconnected, I'm going to maneuver this down where I can work on it, which is right there. Before we get to removing this bushing, we want to make sure that when we install the new bushing, it goes in the same orientation as the old bushing. If not, this angle will be off, and as a result, it will put this bushing into a bind when it's bolted back up to the body. We don't want that. So I'm going to make a mark here at what I believe to be 6 o'clock on how the bushing is oriented. So right in the middle of this bushing down to here. So just carrying that down. This blue mark that's here, that was for assembly at the factory. Here's the tool. It's got a mark on it that says up. So I'm gonna make sure that that faces up. It also says right on the tool to make sure you keep the threads oiled. They also do not want you using impact tools. So they want you using hand tools only on this. They also say put a little bit of oil on the tip. All right, here's the cup. Here's the tool. I'm gonna keep cranking on this until I get some tension. Seems to be in position. This just goes down through the hole here. Come back around, just clip it on. There. That way when this comes out, it won't fall to the floor. Before we get started, why not a little penetrating oil on the outside of the bushing, just for good measure. Once again, they say not to use impact tools for this. That sounds like it just popped out. That, as you saw, was like the easiest part of the job. And this was never actually an easy job in my experience. That's crazy. That was way cleaner and easier than anything I've done previously with these bushings. The instructions are what's stated to loosen up this brake line, and I'm not sad that I did, but I'm not so sure that you really have to, but that little bit extra, honestly, makes it so there isn't so much tension there. Here's our new bushing. I'll put part numbers in the description of tools and stuff. I got this tool here from J&B Tool Sales. You notice these bushings have a long and a short side, like one end is longer than the other. The short side is the side that needs to face you as you push it in. I've also installed solid versions of these, and it honestly did a lot to really make it handle a lot better. So you might consider putting in solid bushings. Now you might think there's no top and bottom, but there actually is, and you can see it if you look closely. This is how it was bolted up into the vehicle. So these witness marks show that this was the side that was fastened to the body. On the bottom, you can see that it's thicker. On the top, it's a little bit thinner. So there technically is a top and the bottom to these. Let's get the bushing and the tool installed. Since I'm not pushing it all the way through, there's no real need to hook this up this time. Once again, doing it with hand tools. Just one last check to make sure. Yeah, everything seems lined up. I'm just gonna say, when it comes to doing auto repair, the right tool can make all the difference, but wait a second. Yeah, it's going in kind of sideways. Just when I start to praise you, that didn't work out so well. I said straight in. You're doing just the opposite of going straight in. All right, now I took some time and I chamfered the edge of the bushing. Give it every advantage to go into this opening. Hope that pays off for me. You know, I think I'll also give this that treatment and just sort of clean out that opening a little bit. By the way, Honda doesn't sell these bushings separately. They want to sell you the whole control arm, and it's expensive. A couple of those are probably more than the car's worth. Yeah, this is just completely ignoring me. It insists on going in sideways. Maybe a little bit of penetrating oil in here, or some kind of oil just to get things going. This really gets in the way when you're not using it. Oh, I just found out this comes off. Once again, I don't know if it's the bushing or the tool or just the situation. At this time, I'm starting to wonder, would it have been easier just to use my old method? All right, for starters, I've got this rigged up so that it is in a better position for me to get to. I also went and chamfered this a little bit more, made sure it was round as it possibly could, and we will try again. That might have been the ticket. Feels like it's finally going in straight. That's okay. I'm replacing the drums. But you might want to, if you have drum brakes, put a lug nut on the end to keep the drum from falling off. Looks like it's coming through nicely on this side. Seems just about all even, all the way around. Finally. Just an update, I'm doing the other side. A couple of tips that I learned. Chamfering that edge helped a great deal. Also just sort of hammering it into place, and I was just feeling on the back side here what was actually working. So I laid my finger inside the groove, and wherever there was a deficiency, that was the opposite side that I hit with the hammer. So in other words, I got it started with a hammer, I chamfered the edges, and it seems to be the most successful attempt yet. But there's a little info on the second side, my second time using the tool, with the things I learned from the opposite side that I hope can help you. As far as depth, they're saying 10 to 12 millimeters. A little bit more. Actually just a shade under 10 millimeters, so we're stopping there. Here's one more note on depth. If you make it even with these outer ridges, you're at the perfect depth. I measured this out, it comes out to about 10 millimeters there. So as far as where you run them in so that they're even with this outside ridge, and you should be good. Now I can remove the tool. My mark went away. You might consider scribing instead. That way penetrating oil won't wash it away. But there we are. Now I have to work on that guy a bit, get that thing back in line. And I've already ordered some new arms. So I suppose I gotta get this other side out. Here are the part numbers for those arms. They're the same on both sides, so you just order two if you need both sides. You have my permission to completely overdo the anti-seize on the bolts, not just on the threads, but also on the shank, because that's what seizes up inside the bushing. Whether or not this will help by the time it gets to the next time, or even if this car will make it to the next time, it's hard to say. But if it does, you'll be ready. Just gonna snug this up. I'm not gonna run it all the way down until everything's together. Make sure the parking brake cable's on this side. Just for good measure, not that it'll mean anything, I'm gonna put a little bit of anti-seize in here too. This is where drilling this hole comes in very handy. This was pretty jacked up, so I ended up bending and hammering it back into shape, and now it functions perfectly and is back just the way it was, if not better than before. Just want to be sure that it can move all the way to one side and the other. Likely this next part's going to be your most challenging part of the installation, and that is getting those bolts and everything to match back up, because it's going to want to fight you. So I take a pry bar, I insert it right into here so that I can move this whole thing. I was doing this down here with my leg. With everything connected, I'll snug it up. And with this, I'll just try to get it either in the middle or close to where it was before if I can see it. It's still gonna need an alignment anyway, but at least we know that the bolts are gonna move and come loose. Well, as usual, things turned out to be a little more challenging than I originally intended, but that's kind of the way things go with rusty vehicles like this guy here. Especially these Civics and Integras, that little control arm there and that little box, if you will, that's a really common issue, and I have no qualms about drilling that hole at all. I don't believe I compromised the structure in any way that's going to cause any problems. I was able to knock everything back into place. It looks like nothing ever happened, except for this time it's able to move back and forth so you can do an alignment. So you will have to do an alignment when this is all said and done. Here's a little tip for pressing those bushings in. I know I had a little bit of difficulty. The night before you go to install them, put them in the freezer and then take them out just before you go to install the bushing. That will shrink it down just a little bit, and it may be just enough to press that in a little bit easier. So there's a little tip for you, and you can use that on any bushings you're trying to press in. Leave them in the freezer overnight before you put them in. They go in a little bit easier that way. The takeaway here is you're going to need fire and ice to make this happen. However, once you do this job, it does tighten up the rear suspension quite a bit, and it does handle better. Personally, in the past, I've done this with solid bushings, and I have noticed a dramatic improvement in the handling. Either way, if you have broken bushings on your suspension, they should be addressed. Here's how you address them on these models here. Like I said, this covers a whole swath of Civics and Acura Integras or Honda Integras, depending upon where you're from. If you have automotive questions not covered in this video, I'm going to put links in the description to EricTheCarGuy.com, which is where I ask you to go to get those questions addressed. I'll also put additional links in the description to other videos and information that will be helpful to you if you need to do this job or something similar to it. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, do all those things that help me make a living. Really appreciate that. Be safe, have fun, stay dirty. I will see you on the next episode of Eric the Car Guy. Thanks for watching.